this short lecture on effective communication as part of Module 6 of the DUST Academy. Across the world, industries are undergoing massive transformations. Coal mines are closing and polluting processes are being phased out, making way for the sustainable industrial transition. Changes include increased renewable energy production, a shift towards greener economies, and care for healthier natural environments. Importantly, they also present an opportunity to involve communities in the future of their regions. Making sure transitions are just and inclusive helps to societally root efforts for sustainability and works towards changes that are more beneficial for all of society. Achieving this fair future for people, the planet, and our collective livelihoods requires meaningful engagement with diverse communities, where their voices are heard and their experiences, priorities, and concerns are acknowledged, respected, and addressed. But are we truly communicating effectively, or do barriers still stand in the way? Many less heard communities have been historically ignored and marginalized in decision-making. Often, we find ourselves dealing with high levels of distrust towards authorities and governmental bodies, which is only added to by new policies that fail to reflect or address the actual needs of citizens. Even when our intentions are good, many obstacles complicate our ability to properly open dialogue with communities. Navigating these challenges requires that we carefully consider our communicative approaches. Could effective communication present a path forward? Effective communication focuses on the expression of feelings, value, beliefs, and meanings surrounding interactions, and it's grounded in honesty. It goes beyond simply conveying information to also incorporate how ideas are received, felt, and understood on a deeper level, and create spaces where meaning is transferred beyond explanation or direct comprehension. On the one hand, we have the affective dimension of communication, which relates to emotional and relational expression. And on the other hand, we have the cognitive dimension, which relates to logical and informational expression. Both are essential for trust and understanding. So in this lecture, you'll learn more about the affective dimension, and you'll learn how to 1. Understand your audience and context, 2. Align messages with what matters to your audience, 3. Find visuals and language that resonate, 4. Choose accessible channels, and lastly 5. Reflect and adapt through feedback. We've organised these into different components of effective communication, so without further ado, let's begin. We first start by laying the groundwork for communication by understanding our context and target audience. Communication doesn't exist in a vacuum. Complex, layered contexts shape how messages are constructed and received, forming the foundation for both effective and effective communication. Contexts influence audiences' worldviews, values, and assumptions, and ignoring them can lead to misunderstood, dismissed, or exclusionary messages. So, consider the spatial, historical, and cultural context, as well as any other relevant factors dependent on your setting. Another important factor to consider is power dynamics, which can sometimes be subtle or explicit, but nevertheless determine whose voices are prioritized and whose are silenced. Intersectionality can also help us understand these overlapping identities and power structures that influence communication. And by acknowledging these dynamics, we can foster more equitable participation to support effective communication. For example, seating arrangements and different ways of using a space like sat, standing, sitting on chairs, or even sitting on the floor can play a significant role in promoting a sense of equality or hierarchy depending on what is desired. Arranging seating in a circle, for example, rather than rows or at the head of a table setup helps break down barriers and signals equal respect for everyone's voice. Hospitality and care can also serve as a critical function in making people feel valued and welcomed, while also reflecting an understanding of the context. Offering food and drinks during workshops or other events engaging citizens, especially when thoughtfully chosen and presented with an audience's preferences in mind, signals to participants that they are appreciated, are cared for, and that their comfort matters. So to support you in your work, you can consider: 1. What context shaped my audience's communication? And here, pay special attention to, as I said before, the spatial, historical, cultural context, as well as other factors in how messages are received and influenced. 2, you can also look at what power dynamics and overlapping identities affect communication. So who has influence, whose voices are amplified, and whose are left out. 3, you can think about: how can I include marginalized voices? So you can do this by identifying ways to bring overlooked perspectives into the conversation and ensure equitable participation. The second component of effective communication is purpose, relevance, and benefit to community, essentially aligning messaging. Building on our understanding of context helps craft messages that resonate emotionally and provide mutual benefit. A central challenge is interpreting this context, though, to turn audience experiences, beliefs, priorities, and concerns into meaningful communication. Without interpretation and self-reflection, messages may miss the mark or fail to connect, and even silence voices. Effective communication adapts messages to audience environments and needs, aligning content with values or addressing beliefs to encourage reflection. In practice, recognizing audience diversity in terms of ethnicity, religion, gender, class, generational narratives, and so forth allows adaptation for effective engagement. Tools like framing theory can guide presentation to highlight perspectives and sentiments most relevant to the audience. Again, in practice, this means ensuring mutual benefit by highlighting how everyone involved stands to gain, which encourages collaboration, investment, and inspires people to join in the collective effort of co-creation. For example, workshop development across the DUST project prioritized audience appeal through a give-and-take approach. Participants in some of our Polish workshops consisted of retired miners, trade union representatives, government officials, and some youth climate activists. Based on the characteristics and expectations of the participants, this diverse group necessitated a more official format with in-person presentations by government officials and climate activists. This allowed for networking opportunities and a platform to listen to and hear voices we may otherwise not. Applying the second effective communication component also means understanding that one size does not fit all. Therefore, we need to adapt our messaging by recognizing our audience diversity, as I said before, in terms of ethnicity, religion, gender, class, generation, and so forth. So, as you continue in your work, you might explore: what assumptions and unconscious as well as conscious biases am I bringing to the table? So reflect on your own ideas, your thoughts, beliefs, and how they might shape how you interpret information. Secondly, how do aspects of your audience's identity shape their perspective and needs? Again, thinking about these different social identities. And thirdly, does my message connect with my audience's emotions, values, or sense of identity? The third component concerns building a communication toolbox, that is, finding imagery, words, and symbols that speak to your audience. Recognizing audience priorities allows us to understand the cultural and visual elements, as well as body and verbal language that can build connection, trust, and memorable communication. A common obstacle, though, is identifying and sourcing relevant representative material. Therefore, sharpening our interpretation skills and creative thinking helps us build a visual toolbox. Familiarity and personification, for example, can help strengthen impact by reflecting audiences' cultural backgrounds, traditions, and customs through imagery, symbols, patterns, styles, colors, and forms. Going back to developing our creative, out-of-the-box thinking skills, exploring unconventional or alternative resources can provide valuable insights into what actually resonates with our different audiences. For example, social media platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and others offer a wealth of information about trends, interests, and preferences across various demographics. By observing user-generated content, popular hashtags, or viral challenges, we can gain a deeper understanding of what captures the attention and sparks meaningful conversations amongst our audience. Music can also be a good way to make communication material more culturally recognizable. For instance, for a social media campaign in Dust's case study regions that aim to increase the use of the e-democracy tool poll.is, we created videos that used music from artists located in the regions themselves. This enabled the instruments, time signatures, modes, and tones to be recognized by our target audiences. And going back to our interpretive tools and skills, asking questions and being open to learning about what resonates with and matters to the people we're communicating with is an essential ingredient for effective communication. This process may involve moments of discomfort as we acknowledge that we do not yet know or fully understand. However, embracing this uncertainty allows us to seek understanding beyond our assumptions, ultimately helping us connect with others on a deeper level. So you can think about, where can I find culturally relevant imagery and language? So you can consider both traditional sources like books and archives, as well as less obvious sources, such as local spaces or social media. You can also think about which visual or cultural elements respectively reflect my audience. Think about symbols, imagery, and styles that align with their identity, values, and lived experiences. And lastly, you can consider, are design elements chosen with cultural awareness? So check that the symbols, imagery, and colors that are used accurately and thoughtfully to represent the diverse meanings they may hold. Our fourth effective communication component concerns communication channels and accessibility in terms of how and where to reach people. With materials and messaging shaped by audience needs, it's important to consider delivery to ensure accessibility across spaces, formats, and languages, as messages often fail when accessibility is overlooked, particularly for marginalized groups. We can therefore address accessibility obstacles by adapting communication in multiple ways, by considering, for example, spatial accessibility. So this involves using familiar spaces and adapting to local realities, considering the practical challenges like rural infrastructure and how people can access space. We can then think about format accessibility by choosing media that aligns with audience needs and resources. For example, would it be better to have in-person, printed, or digital forms of communication? We can then think about language accessibility by presenting information clearly and concisely, using headings, bullet points, as well as culturally appropriate terminology. Looking more closely, this involves using appropriate language, so it's essential to be mindful of how the content, the tone, and presentation in speech, writing, or visuals can unintentionally come across as stigmatizing or patronizing. Such missteps create unnecessary distance between us and the people we aim to engage. Importantly, we can also adapt messaging to the linguistic familiarities of our audiences, not just to the national languages, but also specific regional dialects. Dialects reflect the unique cultural and linguistic identity of a community, and their use can foster a sense of familiarity and trust. This approach helps us to connect with people in ways that feel authentic, making communication more relatable and impactful. Communication is often more impactful when considered with long-term relationship building in mind. So building trust and genuine engagement requires more than just extending invitations to participate. It involves actively prioritizing and investing time and effort into nurturing meaningful relationships with individuals and communities, ensuring that they feel valued and heard. This long-term relationship building can also be done with familiar and respected figures within communities. For example, In rural Catholic areas of Poland, priests have often facilitated communication for regional renewal programs by engaging directly with parish members. Miners in the same regions noted that this method remains effective for reaching older rural populations. Lastly, by being open to exploring different channels and environments is key for maximizing and enriching effective communication by engaging people where they feel most at ease. This might involve creating opportunities for dialogue in shopping centres, in schools, in cafes, sports centres, and as well as other community spaces that are a part of their daily lives or serve as hubs for social interaction. By meeting people in familiar settings and adapting communication to suit the environment, not only does communication become more accessible, but it also demonstrates a genuine effort to understand and respect their preferences. So, again, you can consider, have I considered the physical environment and access needs of my audience in terms of spaces that are convenient, safe, and familiar, as well as accounting for transportation and local infrastructure? You can also consider, is the communication medium aligned with the audience's habits and resources? So in terms of social media, print, in-person, or hybrid methods dependent on the tech access and familiarity of your audience. And thirdly, have you adapted word choice, phrasing, and tone for your audience? The last component of effective communication is feedback and the revision of communication by listening, adapting, and trying again, as naturally the process is iterative. Even well-researched messages can fail if they don't align with audiences' needs, cultural norms, or emotional expectations. Feedback is therefore essential to avoid unclear, irrelevant, or unengaging messages, especially for marginalized groups. We can, then, engage in testing and feedback on content, clarity, visuals, cultural alignment, power dynamics, and format. We can also consult target audiences and experts via focus groups, surveys, interviews to improve messages and to foster shared ownership and accountability. Transparently and regularly communicating to maintain engagement by sharing progress and updates with participants helps them feel connected to the project and aware of how their contributions are shaping its outcomes, motivating them to stay involved. Feedback can also be used as further communication material itself, as exemplified with a storytelling activity in Dust, where participants of the Regional Futures Literacy Labs reacted to the designs produced to display their inputs. These reactions allowed them to further express their experiences and were filmed to add local voices to the material, helping to authentically explain the depictions to external audiences. So, again, you can think about, have I identified which parts of the material need testing? So focus may be on content, clarity, visuals, cultural fit, emotional impact, or power dynamics. You can also think about, did I create a safe space for honest feedback and follow-ups? So this could involve ensuring anonymity when needed, explaining the purpose, and listening actively without judgment. You can also think about which gaps require quick fixes and which ones need longer-term changes, and whether you've prioritized these key improvements based on feedback. So let's recap what you've learned in this lecture. Effective communication is context-aware, it's audience-aligned, culturally resonant, accessible, iterative, and importantly, honest. It transforms communications from a transfer of facts into an exchange of meaning. So take these practices forward. Begin every interaction with curiosity and care. Listen before speaking and value emotions as much as what we cognitively understand. Thank you.